This is a picture of a vulture overlooking an African child. The African child dies, and the vulture starts picking away at the little child. There was a westernized photographer filming this, and he felt horrible about this whole situation, that he didn't help. He figured, let nature take its course, don't get involved. When he got back home, I think it was England, he committed suicide. Ayn Rand, she's a Russian philosopher, and she believes that if you donate money, you're denying the value of an individual.
There is nothing wrong in helping other people, if and when they are worthy of the help, and you can afford to help them. I regard charity as a marginal issue. What I'm fighting is the idea that charity is a moral duty and a primary virtue. Ayn Rand.
And I'm going to quote her. Parasites, moochers, looters, brutes, and thugs can be of no value to a human being, nor can he gain any benefit from living in a society geared to their needs, demands, and protections. A society that treats him as a sacrificial animal and penalizes him for his virtues in order to reward them for their vices, which means a society based on the ethics of altruism. Everybody doesn't have the same chance in life. My parents put me through college. Not everybody has the same chance in life. That's all I have to say.
Your quotation was taken from Ayn Rand's Virtue of Selfishness, and in particular from an essay called The Objectivist Ethics. In that essay, Rand is explaining her ethical philosophy, and she's speaking about the nature of a free society and how individuals can benefit from trading with one another, trading ideas, dividing labor, that kind of thing. And she's saying that living in a society, living with other people, trading with other people, is only beneficial to a human individual if, in fact, that society is living as humans live, as opposed to as animals live. I think what you had said prior to reading this section of Rand's essay was that Rand had said that it is wrong for a person to effectively give out charity. In other words, you were implying that it, according to Rand, is wrong for a person to have saved the child who was dying from the fate of being, having their body defiled by the vulture. Now that's false. That's not part of her philosophy, and in fact, that's not what was at all dealt with by the sentence that you read. But if you think about the sentence itself, just think about the sentence that you read, and keeping in mind what it is you were trying to say with that picture, here are the words that are in the sentence that you were referring to. Parasites, moochers, looters, brutes, and thugs can be of no value to a human being. You were implying that, at least according to Rand, that child who was dying was a parasite, a moocher, a looter, or a thug. Why would you think of that child as a parasite, a looter, a moocher, or a thug? It's certainly not the case that Ayn Rand thought of starving people as moochers, looters, thugs, and parasites. That's a complete misrepresentation of what she was saying, but it's also, I think, indicative of what you think of people who are dying, starving. You're putting them in the same camp as moochers, looters, thugs, and etc. You're making that error, not her. I regard compassion as proper only to those who are innocent victims, but not toward those who are morally guilty. If one feels compassion for the victims of a concentration camp,
one cannot feel it for the torturers. If one does feel compassion for the torturers, it is an act of moral treason toward the victims. Ayn Rand.
The beginning of the paragraph that immediately follows the one you were reading starts as follows. The basic political principle of the objectivist ethics is, no man may initiate the use of physical force against others. No man, or group, or society, or government, has the right to assume the role of a criminal and initiate the use of physical compulsion against any man. That is the context of the statement in which she was referring to moochers, looters, thugs, and etc. She was referring to people who would use coercive physical force to obtain that which they want. That child, starving and dying in the African wilderness, was not using force against anyone. She was not speaking of those who, for no fault of their own, are dying. Although it made her look quite cruel to use that picture while taking her passage out of context, you were by no means fairly representing her philosophy, and in fact you were smearing her. Now, if you had read and understood the entire essay from which you were quoting Ayn Rand, you would have also read the following. One must never make any decisions, form any convictions, or seek any values out of context. In other words, apart from or against the total integrated sum of one's knowledge. What you were doing was what Rand and many others would call context dropping. You were dropping the context of everything she was talking about in that essay when she brought up the figures of the looter, the moocher, the brute, the thug, etc. And it was only because you dropped the context that you were able to put one over on everyone and suggest that she was talking about unfortunate starving children in Africa when she used words like moocher, thug, and looter, and etc. If you did it unintentionally, then you could learn from Rand by reading the essay that you were reading from again, and perhaps getting a better grasp on the importance of not dropping context if you are to understand concepts properly.
And I'm going to quote her. Parasites, moochers, looters, brutes, and thugs can be of no value to a human being, nor can he gain any benefit from living in a society geared to their needs, demands, and protections, a society that treats him as a sacrificial animal and penalizes him for his virtues in order to reward them for their vices, which means a society based on the ethics of altruism. Everybody doesn't have the same chance in life. My parents put me through college. Not everybody has the same chance in life. That's all I have to say.
Now, in the video you just watched, I took the photograph that you started with, the one with the child in Africa dying and the vulture waiting for its meal, and changed the context. I effectively reinserted the proper context, the context that Ayn Rand was speaking of when she mentioned moochers, looters, and etc. You'll notice that in your photograph, the wrongdoer, if you will, the vulture, was not a human being. A human code of ethics doesn't even apply to an animal. It applies to a human being. And therefore I replaced that vulture with a human being, someone who has a choice as to whether to act in a moral fashion or an immoral one. Vultures act largely on instinct. Humans have the ability to choose. And it's only when they have the ability to choose that it's appropriate to start using the language of looter, mugger, abuser, murderer. Clearly the Nazis fit the bill. And clearly Rand was talking not about vultures except perhaps in some figurative sense. She was not talking about the animal called the vulture. She was talking about human beings who choose to act like animals, not like human beings. The Nazis believed that by virtue of their genetic makeup, they had a certain status that was different than any other human individual. That somehow their righteousness or wrongfulness in their conduct was affected by the color of their skin, by their genetic makeup, by their nationality, or what have you. It was an inherently collectivist racism, as is all racism, because racism, when one thinks of someone's race as distinguishing them in some way, one is talking about a collective characteristic, and therefore about collectives. Effectively, what I did is I replaced the inappropriate context with the context that, fit the passage that you were reading. The moocher, the looter, the thug in the passage was not the child, but rather the person who was harming the other individual. Now, there was no human being harming the child, and therefore, in the example, we transformed the image of the child into the image of a mass grave, and the vulture into human beings who had made the choice to make to commit murder. And you'll notice, first off, that when that proper context is restored, your comment that, we all aren't born with the same opportunities is entirely irrelevant to what Rand was saying.
Everybody doesn't have the same chance in life. My parents put me through college. Not everybody has the same chance in life. That's all I have to say.
If what you said had any relevance at all to the proper context in which Rand had been making her statement, then what you said, that some people don't have the same opportunities as others, would imply that it would be right for one Nazi to destroy another human being, but not right for another Nazi to do so, depending upon whether they were born with the same opportunities. One was perhaps born with advantages that the other wasn't born with, and that therefore the disadvantaged one has some kind of right to murder or otherwise enslave someone else. Misfortune, as Rand said, does not give one license to enslave others. And that's true whether misfortune is in the form of, not having all the opportunities and education that another person had, or having run a business very well and then suddenly lost all of your business and gone bankrupt. Bankruptcy does not give one license to enslave others in order to survive. And there's no moral difference between a person who loses their shirt in the stock market and a person who never had an upside to begin with, who never had any wealth to begin with. If they're both poor, they're both in the same moral situation, and neither of them, by virtue of having been in a situation where they are poor, has a license to make other people their slaves. In the context of people who are poor, that means that they cannot themselves, nor with the assistance of a government, force other people to work for them, to hand over their property, or perhaps to hand over their lives, as in the case of Nazi Germany. It's fitting to remember that the theory of Nazism was founded on the idea that if Germans didn't seize land and push people off of land and or kill them first, they would soon find other races knocking on their doors and stealing their land. Hitler believed very much that it was a dog-eat-dog world in which, there are limited resources, and ultimately, with a growing population on Earth, someone's going to have to be murdered, and it better not be the Germans. That was Hitler's guiding belief, his quote-unquote science. And I think that it bears directly on what you're saying about need. If it were true that there are limited resources on Earth, would that suggest to you that it is right, therefore, for someone to die, to be sacrificed, so that others may live? Need is not a license to kill, to enslave, to steal.